And I'd like to look at something in Scripture that's caused a lot of controversy, a lot of fanciful imaginations have gone maybe a little crazy with it. We're going to talk about the Nephilim that are described in Genesis chapter 6. Let's start at the beginning of that chapter. It's only a few verses here we're going to look at, but we're going to tie it into a lot of other things. Genesis 6, verses 1 and 2 read, "Now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose." Now that term sons of Elohim, that's where a lot of the problem has come from. It's thought by many to refer to divine angelic beings associated with Elohim. Well, in Job, the earliest Greek translation of Job translated sons of Elohim as angels of Elohim. And it's really not necessary. The term is ben, which just means sons. But in Job 1 verse 6, there was a day when the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them. And Job 2 verse 1, again, there was a day when the sons of Elohim came to present themselves before Yahweh, and Satan also came among them to present himself before Yahweh. And from a Torah perspective, I think one can easily read this and say, well, it sounds like feast days. That's where Israel is presenting themselves on one of the 3 times of the year, present themselves to Elohim. And that is what this is speaking of, in my opinion. It's not talking about angelic beings. It's talking about his people. Now, in the apostolic scriptures, in the Brit Hadashah, sons of Elohim refer to human beings who do Elohim's will. Look at Matthew 5, verse 9. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of Elohim." Romans 8, verse 14. "For all who are being led by the Spirit of Elohim, these are the sons of Elohim." Romans 8:19. "For the anxious longing of the creation waits eagerly for the revealing of the sons of Elohim." Now, this designation is also used to describe Israel in Exodus 4, verses 22 and 23, where it reads, "Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says Yahweh, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, let my son go, that he may serve me, but you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your firstborn." So, the reference in Genesis 6, verses 1 and 2, to sons of Elohim here refer to the line of Seth. And the daughters of men refer to the ungodly line of Cain. Now, this would tend to make sense since chapter 5 of Genesis gives us the genealogies of both men. We have the genealogies of Seth and of Cain in chapter 5, and then it's leading up right into the first passage in chapter 6. It talks about the sons of Elohim and the daughters of men. Now, with that being the case, this passage would be referring to mixed marriages between believers and unbelievers, between those of Israel and those who are not followers of Elohim. And as we talked about with Torah, has been followed throughout all of Scripture. It was followed at the beginning. Abel did the proper sacrifices. Noah knew the difference between clean and unclean animals. And Elohim's righteous people are not allowed to marry unrighteous people. In Deuteronomy 7, starting in verse 1, it reads, "When Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and shall clear away many nations before you, the Hittites, and the Girgashites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger than you. And when Yahweh your Elohim shall deliver them before you, and you shall defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them, you shall make no covenant with them, and show no favor to them. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of Yahweh will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you," like we see here in Genesis. Exodus 34, verses 14 through 16. "For you shall not worship any other god, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous Elohim. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they play the harlot with their gods, and sacrifice to their gods, and someone invite you to eat of this sacrifice. and you take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. It's prohibited in Torah for a son or daughter of his people to marry a son or daughter that is not his. Look at verse 3. Then Yahweh said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever. We read, he said he'll quickly destroy them, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. You know, this is interpreted to mean that by some that man's lifespan now is going to be 120 years, but that's not really the case. Even after this time, there were a lot of men that lived a lot longer than that. Shem lived 500 years after he became a father. Arpachshad lived 403 years after he became the father of Shelah. Shelah lived 403 years after he became the father of Eber, and so on. So to say that the lifespan was only going to be 120 years after that is not exactly true. Elohim is saying here, you have 120 years left before I destroy the world, before judgment takes place. Now, this prophecy was probably given by Methuselah, since Enoch had already been translated or moved, and it appears that Elohim's specific commands to Noah had not yet been given. So why did Elohim wait so long to judge? You know, the thing about him is he's very long-suffering, and we can thank him for that. We read in 1 Peter 3, verse 20, where it says, who once were disobedient when the patience of Elohim kept waiting in the days of Noah during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Now, he waited this long because he made the promise through Methuselah that destruction would not come until Methuselah died. And that's what many think his name actually means. Now, the passage in Peter that we're looking at here, it's caused a lot of confusion. Let's take a look at it. First of all, let me just read this passage in Genesis one more time, because the two tie together. Okay, Genesis 1, or 6, 1 through 3 says, now it came about when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of Elohim saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves whomever they chose. Now, verse 3, very important. And Yahweh said, my breath will not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. He made that declaration to mankind. That's a very important declaration that was made. Okay, this passage in 1 Peter chapter 3, starting in verse 18, this has caused a lot of consternation, a lot of problems. I'm going to read it to you in its entirety, the way it's translated here in the New American Standard. It says, for Messiah also died for sins, once for all, the just for the unjust, so that he might bring us to Elohim, having been put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he also went and made proclamation to the spirits now in prison, who once were disobedient, when the patience of Elohim kept waiting in the days of Noah, during the construction of the ark, in which a few, that is 8 persons, were brought safely through the water. Now, that's caused a lot of problems, because for centuries that's been misinterpreted. It's been interpreted to say that when Jesus died, he descended into hell. Okay? And then he apparently he went down there, according to what many teach, he went down there to the demon dungeon, wherever the demons are dungeonized, and did an end zone dance for 3 days. And then he came back and resurrected. That's the way that's interpreted. As a matter of fact, the Apostles' Creed, it says in it, if you happen to know it, I was raised Lutheran, I know it very well, it says he descended into hell. And it comes just from that passage in 1 Peter 3, 18 through 20. And then rose from the dead, they say. Well, that's not correct. That's not what this passage is saying. Peter is speaking of the evil men in the days of Noah, in the time of Noah, who are now dead and buried inside the earth because of the flood. They're now buried. Take a look at this passage here. 1 Peter 3, starting in verse 18, it says, they're made alive in the Spirit. This is not pertaining to Yeshua. It's talking about in the Spirit, the breath of the Father, in which he, verse 19, the Spirit of the Father, went and made a proclamation to the spirits, or the life's breath of those now in prison, those that are buried deep in the earth by the flood, who once were disobedient when the patience of Elohim kept waiting in the days of Noah. Who he's talking about, the Spirit made a proclamation that my spirit shall not strive with man forever. That's what 1 Peter 3, 18 through 20 is saying. That's the proclamation that was made. Well, showing alternatives to a couple of Greek words makes it very clear that that's exactly what's being said there. It's a reference to the time of the flood, and when the Spirit of the Father makes that proclamation that he's not going to strive forever with man. And then in verse 4, we finally get to our Nephilim. Now, up to this point, the problem has been we have the righteous men of Elohim were marrying with the unrighteous daughters of the line of Seth, and it was corrupting everybody. And Elohim says, I'll have no more of it. Verse 4, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, in the King James Version, they're called giants. The word Nephilim comes from the Hebrew word nephal, where it says, you can see right there, it comes from H5307, and the H5307 being the fall, which means to fall. Fall away or fall down. It means actually the fallen ones. That's all Nephilim means, and the "im" at the end makes it plural. So the name came to mean giants from the book of Numbers. Let's take a look at that. That's the only other time that Nephilim is used, is in Genesis 6 and in Numbers 13, verses 32 and 33. So they gave out to the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone in spying it out is a land which devours its inhabitants. And all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. So they're saying all the men there are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim. The sons of Anak are a part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. Now, we see the giant men, the sons of Anak, being described as a part of the Nephilim. Well, the sons of Anak were the giant men. Nephilim just means fallen ones. There's a lot of fallen ones there is what they're talking about. And the fallen ones were about to perish in the waters of the flood. Now, these waters are now the waters of the sea, and now may have been referred to in connection with the final judgment described in Revelation. In Revelation 20, verse 13, it says, and the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades, being the grave, gave up the dead which were in them. And they were judged, every one of them, according to their deeds. So what's being said here is that the sea, those that died before the time of the flood, they gave up their dead. And then death and the grave gave up the dead which were in them. And they're all judged, and we're all going to be judged. And we're going to be judged according to the Torah. Well, I hope that helps explain the Nephilim, the fallen ones. They're just the ones that were destroyed before the flood.